IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Today, General Menon and Ambassador Nirupama Menon Rao will be talking about Afghanistan. Let me start by asking Ambassador Menon Rao, what do you make of the current situation? How do you assess the status quo?
I would regard the current situation in Afghanistan as pretty dismal. The scale of violence, instead of being reduced, has only gone up as we speak. And we have witnessed, of course, the what they call peace talks between the US government and the Taliban. And the attendant aspect of that is that the US clearly wants to not just scale down its presence in Afghanistan, but it's looking at a withdrawal. We don't know what the process of that withdrawal will really entail, when it will take place, whether it's going to be precipitate or whether it'll be, phased out. We'll have to see. But the fact is that we have, of course, the fourth presidential elections have taken place in Afghanistan, and we await the outcome of that. But the troublesome aspect of all this is one, of course, the violence that has not gone away. That is a threat to whatever Afghanistan has achieved over the last 18 years. But also that you have a two-cornered kind of communication and negotiation between the Taliban and the US government. But it seems that much of what else there is of Afghanistan, and there is a lot, there is Afghan civil society, there is, even if, there are flaws, have been flaws in the election process, but there is a sovereign Afghan government with whom we deal, the rest of the world deals. What part are they playing in this process? And I think there are very real questions that have arisen in this regard and should worry us as a neighbor of Afghanistan, because we have stakes in that country and we have helped civil society over the last 18 years. Our development and beneficiary assistance is there for us to see, for the rest of the world to see. We are a very popular country in Afghanistan. So the question remains, to what extent is this process not just Afghan-led, but Afghan-controlled, as our government likes to use the phrase?
General Menon, what's your assessment?
I think, firstly, about the elections itself, to me, the election is going to throw up a very contentious result, which will require, like last time, probably a mediation to first get whoever is supposed to have won, put them in power. So there will be a point after the elections when things will be a little uncertain, and probably the Americans will have to play a role like last time and see as to who becomes the president. So that's one issue. It looks like the Americans are now moving to restart the talks. And that's what press report says, that Khalilzad has already had some contacts and likely to take it forward. So we are going to be in a situation before the talks failed, in which the Americans nearly had a deal but didn't finally have one. And I think if Trump gets his way, he'll probably will still have to decide that what elements does he leave behind in terms of presence and yet get into an agreement. I mean, that's going to be the challenge between the Taliban, who probably say that all of you have to go. So it's not going to be easy, and the talks are likely to continue because the Taliban also want to talk. I think, meanwhile, the use of violence by Taliban is going to be as it is, because they control, the government only controls about, I think, 50% of the districts out there. Taliban is about 15% of the districts, and the rest the control is actually disputed between the two. I mean, it's you can't say who's in control. So we see more of the same over this year. With the Americans, probably we really don't know what they're going to actually have to give to get that deal for Trump to say that I've actually pulled out. That's going to be their challenge.
Yeah, but do you think that we have serious enough interests in Afghanistan? Why are we even concerned about Afghanistan?
Of course we do. The simple fact of geography itself, that we do not want, and I think that comes to I don't think the Indians would be amenable to the idea that the Taliban takes over Afghanistan, which means the Taliban in combination with Pakistan would pose enough problems for us. So that is definitely not in our interest. So to say that we should not be concerned, actually I think is ignoring the fact that we will have a geographic space from which can act as a base from where inimical interests can actually be projected onto us. So we can't say that Afghanistan, we are not even connected there, why should we bother? I don't think that would be our attitude towards dealing with Afghanistan.
Are our interests only limited to preventing Afghanistan from becoming a source of terrorism and militancy and insecurity for us? Or do we have deeper interests there?
Well, first of all, let me say we have vital interests there from the point of view of national security. The General just referred to the fact that, in the event of a U.S. withdrawal, and let us assume that the Taliban come back into, the
corridors of power.
The corridors of power. What do we expect? Now, who are the Taliban? Today, the Taliban have emerged as a very confident, very, keen on dominating the Afghan space kind of organization or group, and they have links across the border with Pakistan. Obviously, even as Pakistan is trying to sort of maintain what they call a detached role, saying that they're not involved, obviously they would prefer a scenario, a pre-2001 scenario, the kind of scenario that existed in Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001, where the Taliban dominated the space. They would obviously like that, because that would essentially mean that the Taliban would not only listen to the Pakistani diktat, because I assume their survival also depends to some extent on that, but also because the Taliban doesn't want foreign presence in Afghanistan, does not want any foreign troops. And not that I don't know whether there are any basic enmity between the Taliban when they look at India, Taliban looking at India. I mean, that has to be really analyzed more deeply. Should India talk to the Taliban? That is another question. The situation is not exactly as it prevailed prior to 2001. And if the Taliban are going to be a factor in Afghanistan's future, then perhaps we should be thinking very, very on our feet about how we are going to deal with a post-peace or truce scenario in Afghanistan, which would entail, obviously, some role being played by the Taliban. These are questions that I think we should answer if we are obviously keen on maintaining all that we have achieved in Afghanistan from 2001 onwards.
Since she has posed the question, I'll ask you, General, to answer it. Should we talk to the Taliban, assuming that they have more than a 50% chance of making it to the post-election dispensation in Kabul?
I would think, from our point of view, if we think that after the American withdrawal, let's say they do, things are just going to be that the Taliban is going to take over Afghanistan and Afghanistan is going to be stabilized by the Taliban takeover, I think that's not the scenario which is going to prevail, because the Afghan government, which is there, is not going to just give over power to Taliban just because the Americans have made an agreement with the Taliban. That's not going to happen. I think it will be in our interest that we should continue to maintain our support to the Afghan government, politically, morally, or any other way that we can. Because in my view, it has to be the Afghans have to solve this problem between themselves. It will involve violence. It will involve violence between the Afghan government, which is there, the Afghan army, and the Taliban the moment the Americans leave. It's not going to be that Taliban comes and sits and take over. That is not going to be. And Pakistan obviously will be supporting the Taliban. I think that sort of scenario is where we should play what our interest is, which is to support what we have been saying, because we have always been saying that the Taliban is the problem, not because of the Taliban, because of the ideology, basically, because of the fact that they completely violate all principles of justice and human rights. And so therefore, if the Taliban is now talking today, they are not going to change their clothes.
But wouldn't the realist appreciation of this be that, look, if the Taliban becomes a stakeholder in the Kabul government, is part of a post-election government where they are in sort of a coalition with the Afghan current government of now, they are accommodated into the power structure in some way or the other to prevent outright violence from breaking out, which means they are like a party which is in power or partly in power or in coalition. Shouldn't we be speaking to them?
What I'm saying is the situation which you are imagining, that the Taliban will actually be dovetailed into and the other government, is most unlikely, because it has to, you see, the contestation of forces within Taliban, within Afghanistan, is what we have to understand. They are not just going to sit around and merge together. It will happen after a fight. That's what has been happening. After all, the Taliban is there because the main this thing is about getting the foreign forces out. After the foreign forces, then Taliban wants to come to power. Why would they want to share with anybody else? Especially if they have the support of Pakistan.
I'll ask the ambassador the question. So should we be talking to the Taliban?
Well, the NATO has a kind of acronym. I don't know if you know. It's called BLUF, B-L-U-F. Bottom line, up front. So I think India has to decide what is its bottom line on this. Up front, we have to come to terms with that post US troop withdrawal scenario. I agree with the general. It's not that the Taliban will just land up there and start ruling the country, but there will be every attempt on their part to jockey for positions, to gain strategic ground, and to establish an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which is really what they want. They don't want an Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. So that's going to be the challenge, really. To what extent, and here I agree, that the very brave Afghan security forces, the special forces and all, need to be bolstered, because in the event of the civil war, let us say, breaking out in full force, on whose side will we be? We will obviously be on the side of democracy, constitution, civil society, and the upholding of all the values that arrangement would
and our traditional allies and partners, which would be the erstwhile Northern Alliance and their descendants.
But what I'm saying is that it's a very, very difficult situation that stares us in the face.
Yeah. So now let's take it a little more into a little more difficult territory. Donald Trump already said that he would expect countries like India to step in and provide military support or military assets in Afghanistan. Do you think that we should do that? Do you think, especially now that it's not 2009 where things had stabilized to some extent, it's 2019, and there is going to be a massive amount of hostility which is likely to result, if it's like a replay of 1989-90, there's going to be massive amount of civil war. Do you think India should be sending troops to Afghanistan? Because the easy answer is simple, giving them financial aid, sending them arms, material, that's easy. But the tougher question is sending troops.
I would say sending troops would be a very bad idea, for the simple reason that the fight there is local. We would become another element in the fight itself, because we would get involved in the fight. We would get not much in return, because if you really want to make a difference out there, you can't do it with 10,000 troops. You've got to do it with much larger, which India doesn't have. In the geopolitical situation we find ourselves, we don't have such sort of military capacity to spare to go and do the fight in Afghanistan, if we want to make a difference in military terms. So I would think that we can do many other things. And that one of the reasons is, I would think that firstly, the Americans are definitely going to make firepower available through air power to the Afghan government, even after they leave. That's one thing which will always be available to them. Two, they will also make available the technical intelligence which America is capable of. And three, the Americans would probably leave some people in some form as advisors to do, to
trainers,
help
advisors,
and that sort of thing.
backseat
So
drivers.
it's not going to be they're just going to vacate the space. The American presence will be there. The Americans have one concern why Trump is actually moving about. He doesn't want any American to die in Afghanistan. And that's what their concern is. Their main concern is about losing troops. So if they can do it with air power where the chances of losing troops are less, they would actually come to that. But for us, I think whatever we might do, one of the things which we can really support the Afghans is actually to train their police forces. They've got a very large police force. And I think there's a lot of scope for us to train the police force. And we are already training a large part of the military leadership in the IMA and so on. So putting boots on the ground in Afghanistan is not a good idea at all. We'll just get into a quagmire because there is no easy solution to the Afghan problem itself. Afghan problem does not come from the Afghanis. It comes from the geography, from where it is situated. Because of the fact that actually, if it was not there where it is, then the Afghans wouldn't have so many other people wanting to be in the fight. So that's a structural condition which Afghans actually cannot overcome. So we'll just be part of the problem.
The basic question is, to what extent can India be a mover and shaker in this? Right now we are not. We don't seem to be at the table. I mean, the Russians are there, the Iranians are there, of course, the Americans, the Pakistanis are consulted on everything. And the Chinese, of course. The Chinese seem to somehow make sure that they are present in the room. So how do we get into the room, really? We have a certain approach. We want, the gains of the last 18 years to be preserved. But what is our bottom line? As I said, up front, we should be able to weigh in, I think, to what happens there. It's true that we should not send troops. Definitely we should not. But how do we strengthen the capacity of the powers that are not on the dark side? I mean, as an Indian, I feel the Taliban is on the dark side when it comes to democracy, when it comes to women empowerment, their participation in public life, when it comes to involvement with other countries, relations with other countries. I mean, they seem to be so ill-prepared and ill-equipped and unwilling also to learn those ways that can enable Afghanistan to build on what they have achieved, what that society has achieved in the last 18 years. And that's the real threat. And we should be able to strengthen the capacity of the Afghan forces to withstand these threats that they will no doubt face. Build capacity, whether it's within Afghanistan by training or here in India. And to what extent, though we don't talk to Pakistan at all, but it's ultimately India, Pakistan and Afghanistan together that can help create some kind of a dispensation that helps the people of Afghanistan. Without Pakistan, it's not going to happen. And without Pakistan and India talking to each other, it's not going to happen either.
So Afghanistan's future is in the hands of Pakistan then. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And to the extent that we have good relations with with Pakistan, Afghanistan doesn't become a security threat. If our relations with Pakistan deteriorate, then Afghanistan has a potential to be a security threat. And then the focus of our Afghanistan policy should be Pakistan. Right? That's what it means?
Yeah, because there's an arc of crisis developing here.
See, the question actually is Pakistan's proximity and historical connections now established over a period of time to the whole problem in Afghanistan is something which is very deep. You can't just wish it away. So to think that a dispensation like Taliban, which comes to power in Pakistan, would be in our interest or it would actually work for us, I think we are deluding ourselves because that is exactly what we don't want to happen. The question is, what is it that we can do for it? And that's where the problem is. Normally, if Trump says, why don't you send troops? That's a good idea. The fact remains that we are not interested into getting into that quagmire of Afghanistan, which is an intractable problem. You really look at it from any direction. Finally, it is intractable. The question is, how do you reduce the level of violence and get some sort of manageable government where some people can have some sort of peace? That's what it is. There is no solution to the problem. There is only a process which is there. And process has to be played out. I would think if the Americans actually move out of Afghanistan, and if the Pakistanis, the Taliban and the Afghan government get into what sort of fight that is, it'll probably give us an opportunity to make sure that we can be a player because we can provide help to the side that we want to, which we are. We're already providing. And it will also divert Pakistan's attention towards Afghanistan. So give us that much of, you can say, relief from Pakistan's machinations towards this side. So that's what it'll do. It's not because we want the situation. What I'm saying is this situation is what will come to be if the Americans withdraw.
My own feeling is even more than the welfare of the Afghans, which of course is an indisputable issue that we must all support. There's the issue of counter-terrorism. We should be concerned about the radicalization of Afghan society in the event, unlikely or likely, we don't know, of the Taliban acquiring more strategic ground in Afghanistan. How are we going to deal with that? Because we would like de-radicalization, as we would like in Kashmir. We would want de-radicalization across the region. And if that is not going to be there for us, it's going to be a serious matter, because the whole issue of counter-terrorism and dealing with radicalization and radical groups that morph into each other. People who are not with the Jaish or the Lashkar today morph into the Islamic State in Khorasan, or they are with the Al-Qaeda next time. There is really no cell walls that divide these terror groups. And I think this is something that stares us in the face, and we should be very, very worried about what is the unfolding scenario of events in Afghanistan.
So, as we await the results of the elections in Afghanistan, this conversation between the general and the ambassador leaves me with the conclusion that we have very limited ways of affecting the outcomes in Afghanistan. But the outcomes could be such that they put very unpalatable choices in front of us. Dealing with the Taliban, negotiating with the Taliban, doing deals with the Taliban, or maybe having to commit troops to Afghanistan. These are difficult questions that we'll have to contend with. The other angle is that, at least for now, the insecurity that comes from Afghanistan can be managed through better dealings with Pakistan. So on that note, we end this conversation, and we'll come back to you with more interesting topics in the weeks to come.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Do you wish you were smarter? Well, so do we. But the next best thing?
We could make you sound smarter.
And to help you with this endeavor, we are Simplified, a podcast that attempts to break down the complex world around you with a little knowledge, a lot of poor jokes, and a ton of random trivia.
Episodes out every Monday
On the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
See ya!